Well then, welcome everybody. I'm Michael Coates, and as has been mentioned, I'm a trustee, but from the Durham Wildlife Trust. I'm also one of the county recorders for the British Dragonfly Society. And so I have both an interest in the Wildlife Trusts and obviously an interest in dragonfly and damselfly. And presumably you also have an interest in that, hence you're logging on this evening. So the aim of this evening is to give you some basic skills in identification, but also to talk a bit about the life cycle and how to photograph and record your sightings. But predominantly we're talking about identification skills. So if you have questions, as was mentioned a second ago, there's relatively few of them, so you can unmute. You can do that by sliding your mouse down to the bottom of your screen, and you will see on the far left hand side a microphone. If you click on that, it will unmute you. Or you can, in most cases, just press your space bar and it will unmute you. Or if you slide along that menu that appears when you put the mouse down at the bottom, you will see a chat function, and you can type in there, and I will keep on stopping periodically and see if questions have been asked. So don't stand on ceremony. I'm more than used to being interrupted in these types of things, because ordinarily we do them face to face in big groups or as we're walking around a reserve. So feel free to ask questions as you wish. So the plan in the next hour to 90 minutes, and the reason it says ish like that is because there's quite a lot of content to get through, but it really depends on how many questions have been asked. So it's going to be somewhere around that time frame. But what I'm intending to cover, we'll start with what is the difference between a dragonfly and a damselfly, because that's key as a first step for learning how to identify them. We're then going to talk a bit about their physiology, their life cycle, but the bulk of it is going to be how to identify the species that you could see between tomorrow when you go out and by the late summer. We're not doing all the species you could see in your area. It would be too long a session. You never know, we might run another one of these later in the season, but these will be the species that you can see over the next few months. I often get asked, what is it these dragonflies are doing? In other words, an explanation of their behavior. So I'm going to talk a bit about their behavior, where to spot them, because if you don't really know how to, where to go, then clearly that's going to be useful. And I'm going to talk about some particular reserves in your local region. And something that we're wanting to encourage, not just in your region, but nationally, is to actually record, as in submit a sighting of what you've seen. And if you're worried about doing that because you're new to it, please just go for it, because there will be a recorder like me in your region who is well used to receiving sightings, looking at the photo next to it, seeing that you've claimed to have spotted the equivalent of a dodo, and then they will correspond with you, ask for a better description, and they will probably change your sighting to what it was you actually saw. So it's better that you submit sightings than you don't, and I'll talk a little more about that as we go on. So what is it we're talking about this evening? Well, we're talking about odonates. And odonates, or dragonfly and damselfly, as we would know them in everyday speech, have been on this planet for a very long time. They've been around since the Triassic time frame even, and we know that through fossil records. And I've put up an image of a dragonfly nowadays up in the top right to give you a sense of scale. But back in the day, when the world had way more oxygen than it does now, dragonfly would have had a wingspan of about 1 meter. Now we're probably talking at most maybe 10 centimeters. So they were way, way larger back in the day. But essentially, even in the Triassic period, you would have easily been able to recognize them as dragonfly or odonates. The only real difference, as I say, was their sheer size. They did have antennae back then, which they have lost now. But otherwise, evolution has simply allowed them to remain very much like you're seeing here, but simply much smaller. So they've been around for a very long time. There's about 5,000 species of dragonfly in the world. However, they are much more common where there is warm weather. So I live quite often out in Mexico, and we get way more species out there, a lot more colorful ones. So out of the 5,000 in the UK, there's about 47. Why? Because we are a cold country. And if you look at where Birmingham is and the Black Country, in the sort of center there, you're on the cusp of the southeasterly weather and the southwest and the northwest. So you're in between three different weather zones. It does mean that compared to where I am up in Durham in the northeast, you're about 1 degree warmer than my region. And you're going to see in a minute that that 1 degree makes a massive difference to the amount of dragonfly that you will be able to see compared to me, and the quantity that you will get. They really do like warmer weather, but they do also require water. They require for their life cycle for an area to be wet 12 months of the year. And you guys get about 15 days per year of heavy rain, plus of course other days when it simply rains. And that's good for keeping bogland areas, wetland areas, ponds full, rivers obviously, but wetland areas. You are close enough to the southeast as well to occasionally get migrants that get blown in from the continent. So you're in quite a good position in the UK, but do remember there's only about 47 species in the UK. And that's one of the reasons why I got into dragonfly. 4 years ago, I didn't know one dragonfly from another. I am now the county recorder. That shows you how quickly you can learn because there's only 47 species. Roughly half of them are dragonfly and half of them are damselfly. So you're now down to about a 1 in 22, 23 chance of getting your identification right. Divide that again by color, and you've got about a 1 in 4 chance of getting your identification right. Compare that to birds, butterflies, moths, or flowers, and the learning curve for dragonflies is incredibly fast. So hopefully after tonight, you will be able to impress your friends and see how quickly you can learn how to do it. Where will you see them? Basically anywhere that is wet throughout the year or is near to somewhere that is wet throughout the year. Lakes, ponds, streams, canals, ditches. I don't really need to explain what a wet area is. It doesn't have to be particularly glamorous. There we have Thursley Common down in Surrey, 29 species found there. And you can look at that. It's just a boggy area. They love that. So it doesn't have to be a wonderful touristy place, just wet and boggy or near to somewhere that's wet, and you're likely to see odonates. Now in your region, a couple of places you might want to visit. Hillhook, local nature reserve near Sutton Coldfield. You're going to receive a copy of these slides, by the way, so all these references and ID skills will be in there, but you can see we've put on the Ordnance Survey grid reference. This site is wonderful for, well, a whole range of species, but particularly dragonfly because it's wet. You can tell it's definitely wet because you have older trees living there. They're joining a lake. It's a diverse habitat. You've got a good range of dragonfly there, but it isn't regularly surveyed. So one of the things we would love is for you to add this site onto your weekend visits and to submit your sightings. Similarly, Moseley Bog. The name doesn't necessarily entice people to go there. I mean, it's a bog, but as I mentioned earlier, dragonflies love that type of environment. But you look at the map, you've got bogland, you've got woodland, you've got open pastures, lots of paths for you to go on. You've got ponds, as I mentioned. Most importantly, you've got a wide range of plant species and dragonfly species. So they're two of the trust sites that we would particularly like you to visit, see dragonfly and submit sightings for. But when you receive a copy of these slides, you're going to find that we've given you details of a range of other locations, hopefully near you. Now, something I just want to point out is you can see on this slide alone that these locations have around about 20 species, 21, 20, 19 species regularly seen there. Up here in the northeast of England, our Trust's head office is 2 minutes from my house. It's on a nature reserve called Rainton Meadows. In the northeast of England, it's considered to be a dragonfly hotspot, and we get 15 species. Your local sites have 20 or more, and that's what 1 degree of difference does. So you're very lucky compared to where I am, but many of the sites, and as I say, you're going to receive all this information, have more than we have here in the northeast in our hotspots. So there's plenty of places that you can go and visit. Well, assuming that you see one fly by, the first thing that you need to identify or work out is, am I looking at a dragonfly or a damselfly? And the easiest way is to just look at the sheer size. So I've tried to put these photos in scale. So a dragon, think of a dragon, just the word, it's big and meaty and powerful. So a dragon is big and a damsel is small and dainty. So that's the first way of telling the difference. And then you look at the wings. So take a look at the wings on that one. Now take a look at the wings on this one. That one. This one. Well, hopefully you spotted a difference, and that is that damselflies can put their wings back. Dragonflies cannot. So once a dragonfly has emerged, its wings will always be spread out. A damselfly can obviously spread its wings, otherwise it couldn't fly, but it can also do that, which a dragonfly cannot. Then you look at its head. So this is a common darter, which is a dragonfly. I did this one with my phone. In the autumn in particular, on a sunny afternoon, you can often get within, just a few centimeters of them. You can see there that its eyes meet in the middle at the top of the head. Basically, its whole head is one big mouth and eyes that meet. So dragonflies, their eyes touch, whereas damselflies have their eyes on each side of their head like Princess Leia's hair, or somebody with those big headphones on. Eyes on the side of the head mean it's a damselfly. Eyes that meet together at the top mean it's a dragonfly. You can also, of course, just go by how they're flying. So damselflies, it's very weak, very brief flight. Whereas a dragonfly, if it's coming towards you, you will duck. And they will often hover in front of your face and take a look at you. So here we have a video, and as you can see, there's quite a bit of meat on whatever this is that's flying, and I'm struggling to keep up with it. Well, you wouldn't struggle to keep up with a damselfly. And remember, a damselfly has very little on it. So by default, we can tell this is a dragonfly, because if it hit you, there would be a bit of a thud, and it's big and chunky, and it's really fast. That one, by the way, is a southern hawker. We'll come on to how I know that in a minute, but at least we can tell even from a distance that that is a dragonfly. Any questions so far? If there are, unmute or put it in the chat. I'll take that as a no. So how else can you identify it? Well, nowadays, nearly everybody has a camera with them of some shape or form, often on your phone. And dragonflies and damselflies, they do come to rest. So when they come to rest on some vegetation, the way I take a photograph is I make sure my shadow does not fall over them, because that will scare them off. No sudden movements. I put my arm out, I take a picture, I make one step forward, I take another picture. Then another step forward, I take another picture. And the reason you do it like that is if you wait until you're close enough for the perfect shot, it will fly off. This way, at least you get a series of photos where it's getting bigger and bigger. And ideally, you take the photograph from different angles. And the reason for that is you get a good guidebook. And the guidebook that I would recommend is this one here. The details are in the slides when you get them. You will see that it shows you photographs from the different angles and what to look out for from the angle that you managed to get a photograph of it from. That was a terrible sentence, but hopefully you get my drift. So once you've got a guidebook, remember that I said you've got about a 1 in 4 chance of getting it right. It's really going to make it quite easy for you to identify. Now, it is probably worth you learning a bit about their physiology, partly because the book will often refer to a feature to help you identify it. And unless you know what part of the body it is they're talking about, that will be meaningless to you. And for tonight, really, the only ones you really need to know are this one here, which is the front of the wing, the leading edge of the wing, is called a costa, like Costa coffee. So if we talk about the costa, we're talking about the leading edge of the front wing. And when we talk about the thorax, we're talking about the side of its body here. And then we'll talk about S numbers, S1 to 10. And dragonfly and damselfly abdomens are divided into 10 sections, hence the letter S, section 1 through to section 10. And because they have different markings on each section, one of the ways of identifying them, the guidebook will probably tell you that there is a black mark on S5. Well, now you know what S5 is. It's this central part here. And if it talks about S9 and 10, it's talking about the ones right near the end. And the other part of your body, the body that you need to be aware of, it's a wonderful phrase, is the anal appendage. Yes, I get to say the phrase anal appendage to people on a daily basis. And the reason you need to know about that is that's how you tell the difference between a male and a female. You basically look at its anal appendage. I'll be showing you that difference right now. So, am I looking at a male or a female dragonfly or damselfly? Well, the first thing to note is that if it's really colourful, it's most likely a male. Like most animal species, females tend to be quite dull in coloration, partly for camouflage, but the males, partly to attract attention, tend to be the colourful ones. And the names typically correspond to the colours of the male. So if it's called a blue something or other, or a red whatever, it's the male it's talking about because they're the colourful ones. And then you look at its anal appendage. Now, as we're going to come on to, they mate by the male grabbing the female by the back of the neck and not letting go until the deed is done. They are really not politically correct dragonflies. So the male grabs the female by the back of the neck, and in order to do that, they have to have an anal appendage which is like a caliper, like a grabber. And so if the back of it looks like a grabber, this one on the left there, it's a male. If it looks more decorative, like a set of streamers, and it's wider apart, it's a female. So close together and like a grabber, it's a male. Further apart and flowing, it's a female. Now in your region, these are the species that have been seen since 1997. You will see at the top, the brown hawker is the most common one. But for the sake of tonight, we're going to concentrate on the ones towards the top of this list because you're unlikely to see the ones down near the bottom. And you'll see that the most common species seen in your region is the brown hawker, which is interesting because where I am, we only saw a handful of those last year. And again, that shows you what 1 degree of difference makes. This list will come to you. The reason we're providing this list is, if you're unsure as to what you're seeing, just use some statistical common sense. It's most likely one of the ones towards the top of this list. And by the time you've then decided, was I looking at a dragonfly or a damselfly, was it blue, brown or red, you've more than likely got your identification. So this list can help you just to make you narrow it down in your guidebook as to which ones should I be checking out. Now, at this time of year, if you see, and where you, in your region, if you see a damselfly, and we can see this as a damselfly, eyes on the side, very dainty, and it's red, there is only one red damselfly in your region, and that's called the large red damselfly. It's the first to appear in the UK, generally in April. The females are less red, they're more brown, and immature ones have less red. But the good thing is that where there is a female, there is nearly always a male. So if you see one and you think, oh, that doesn't really fit any of the colorations, look around, it's more than likely a female. There will be a male hanging around pretty close. Sadly for the females, they are rarely left alone. So the easiest way when you're a beginner is identify the male, and then more than likely a similar looking one nearby is going to be the female. They're all over your region, as you can see from the little map down there, very common. And as I say, you can't get this one wrong. It's the only one in your region that is red. Blue ones, though, are the quintessential damselfly. And many people assume that when they see one of these blue ones flying around, and they see them on the television, and they see them on their walks, they assume they are the same species. But there are actually 4 types of blue damselfly in the centre of England. The blue-tailed, the common blue, the azure, and the red-eyed damselfly. Do remember though that when they're just born, that's called emerging, or they're teneral. When they're very young, they tend to be very washed out. They don't really develop the blue colour for a few days, and the females, as I mentioned earlier, have far less of the coloration, but where there is a female, there'll be a male. So how do you tell the difference? Well, a common blue is very blue. So if it's really predominantly blue, it is most probably a common blue damselfly. Remember I said about the females being more washed out. There's the male on top. The male, when they're mating, is always on top. The female underneath, you can see, is sort of a greeny brown, but with exactly the same side markings. So if we go back up, here's the male. You'll see it has a blue thorax on the side with a narrow black stripe across it. But this blue side is completely uninterrupted. It's blue. You look at the female, completely uninterrupted coloration on the side with a narrow black line, and we can tell from the male that it's a common blue. The one that gets most confused with is called the azure. But once you know how to tell the difference, you can really impress your friends. The way you tell the difference is, if you look at the side, firstly, the stripe, the black stripe, is much broader. Now, to be fair, unless you had a common blue right next to it, how would you know whether that was a narrow stripe or a black one? So an easier way is to look at the blue side, and you will see there on this azure that there is a short spur, a black spur sticking out into it. It's not an uninterrupted blue. And then you look at the tail. This is called S9 and S10. And the common blue, this is completely blue at the end. On the azure, you have this black cup shape. So if it has black breaking the blue marking at the end, and it has a little bit of a black spur, it's an azure and not a common blue. So if you look bottom right, there's your common blue, no little spur, completely blue towards the end there. You look on the azure, it's got that black marking and it has that black spur. So that's how to tell the difference between those two. The other blue one in your area will be the blue tail. And really it's referring to this perfect blue ring. It's the male again that has the blue ring. But the female actually has 5 different body colorations, but all of them will have this perfect concentric colored ring. And if you see that in your region, it's a blue tail. And the other way of telling both on male and female is these wing spots. Normally on any dragonfly or damselfly, it's one color. And on a blue tail, it's a 2-tone color spot on the wing. So if it has a perfect colored ring like this, and it has a 2-tone mark on its wings, it's a blue-tailed damselfly. Here we have one of the other colorations of the female, rufescens, which is a pinky one, but again, you see the perfect blue ring. That means in your region, it's a blue tail. I often get asked, what do they eat? Well, they eat insects, and this applies to dragonflies and damselflies. They put their legs out, which are hairy, a bit like my arms. They put them out like this, and they just fly up and down. And the flies and insects get caught in their legs, and then they shovel them into their mouth, like a JCB digger. But this one was photographed a couple of weeks ago. So this is a blue tail here, and the one underneath it is an Azir. And basically it's biting into the Azir's appendix just below the thorax. You can now see it's actually detached its the abdomen from its thorax. It's now lost a wing, and in this final picture down here bottom, you can see there is now a thorax, some legs, and 2 of its 4 wings. Everything else has been bitten off by the other damselfly. So basically they eat any insect, including other damselflies and dragonflies. Now another one relatively rare in your region, but you have more of them than we do, is called the small red-eyed damselfly. And you'll notice that it has that little spur that I talked about earlier, but most importantly, it has red eyes. So if it's predominantly blue and has red eyes, in your region, it's a small red-eyed damselfly. The other alternative with red eyes you don't get in your region. So if it's blue with red eyes, you've got your identification. It's a small red eye. Now another bluish one, but very distinctive. You typically see this one near rivers rather than just boggy areas or ponds. It's called the banded demoiselle. It's one of my personal favorites. I think it's absolutely beautiful because it has this iridescent coloration and this beautiful dark marking through the wings on the male, that is. The females are beautiful to look at, but I have to say I think the males are particularly striking. And this is what you're looking for, an iridescent green body, and on the male a broad dark marking through the wings. The females have translucent wings with coloration all the way along, but with an iridescent green body. The male has a darker iridescent body and this dark band, hence the name banded demoiselle. They're increasingly becoming common in the UK. You can see them, as I mentioned, near many slow-flowing rivers. Fantastic to look at, very beautiful in flight. In a month or so's time, you're going to start seeing another one that has an iridescent thorax here. This is called the emerald damselfly. I say in a month or so's time because it tends to come after the blue ones have been out for a while, and it's easy to identify because of this sometimes coppery, but often really like an emerald jewel. You'll see it catching your eye. You'll think somebody's dropped a jewel. They really catch the light, and it has these beautiful blue eyes and a smoky blue tail. Blue eyes, coppery or iridescent emerald thorax, and a smoky blue tail. There is only one species in your region, and that's the emerald damselfly. If you go further south, there are ones it could be confused with, but statistically, if you see one that fits that description where you are, you're looking at an emerald, and they'll start to emerge quite soon. Now, so far we've talked about damselflies, but the first dragonfly, and they've been out since April, to appear is normally the four-spotted chaser. How do you identify it? Well, quite easily, because when you look at the wings, it has 1, 2, 3, 4 spots. Doesn't matter whether you count that way or count this way. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's the only one with the 4 spots. So if it's golden in color, well, I'll show you the other colorations in a minute, but it has these 4 spots. It's a 4-spotted chaser. Very, very distinctive. And the coloration when it's mature, as in more than a few days old, is a vibrant gold. So when they're flying around, they're really bright coloured gold. When it settles, look at the wings. You can't mistake it for anything else once you've seen the wings. There is another one that has that can look golden, and that's this one here. But that's the female that's sort of yellowy gold. The male that you're looking at here is smoky blue. It has a broad body, smoky blue with some yellow on the side, and that is called a broad-bodied chaser. So you're looking at a broad-bodied chaser there. The females are yellow, but they have exactly the same body shape and the same markings on the wings. So there you have the female on the left and the male on the right. And you'll see that it has that dark coloration onto its wings right next to the thorax and the abdomen. Really, there's nothing else you can mistake this for. There is one that I'm going to show you in a minute which looks vaguely similar, and I'm going to show you how to tell the difference. But really, if you get a good look at this, male or female, you can't really get this one wrong because of the shape of the body and the colours. The one that occasionally people mistake it for is this one, called a black-tailed skimmer. And you'll see I've put some arrows on here, and that's to help you identify the difference. So firstly, you will see that it has a dark end of its tail, hence the phrase black-tailed. But you will notice here on the side, there is no yellow like the broad-bodied chaser has. So it can't be a broad-bodied chaser. But if you look, it is very thin from top to bottom. It's not very deep. Whereas if you look at a broad-bodied chaser, it's got some meat on it. It's deep and it has that yellow side. So we go back up. We go back down, get a good look at it, different angles, very easy to tell the difference. The same with the females. Both have this yellow coloration, but look at the difference in depth there. So as long as you can try and get to look at it from different angles, you can't really mistake the two. They are vaguely similar, but it's either going to be a broad-bodied chaser or a black-tailed skimmer. And once you've got a good look, any guidebook or just a copy of these slides, you'll be able to tell the difference. Now, the most common one apparently in your region is the brown hawker. I'm very jealous because we only had a handful of these last year. It is very easy to identify, and that could be possibly why you've got so many records, because it's so easy. And the reason it's so easy is it's predominantly brown, hence the name brown hawker, and it has golden wings. So as it's flying around, golden wings, very easy to spot, brown body, there's really only one it can be, and that's a brown hawker. There is a little bit of blue on it, but it's predominantly brown with golden wings. So you're not going to be able to get that one wrong. There's nothing really to mistake it for. The other most common one in your region is the common darter. Now, I'm just going to pause for a second because I see that there's some questions popping up. I'm just going to see if I need to answer anything. Oh no, it looks like people are making comments about things they've seen rather than asking questions. So, oh, that's good.
No questions, Michael. It's just me sharing some information on the chat. You're good to go.
Excellent, no problem at all. I didn't want to ignore somebody's question. So another common one in your region and in mine is the common darter. They are widespread, and the males are reddy brown with two yellowish side panels. So here we see a reddy brown body, and here on the side of the thorax, yellowy side panels. There is one species you could mistake this for, so I'm going to show you the difference between the two in a minute. But to be honest, because this is so common, and if you see these yellowy panels on the side and it's reddy brown, it's more than likely a male common darter. So there we go, there's the male. They develop this reddishness as they mature, and then when they get even older, they lose that reddish and it turns into sort of a greeny brown. But for most of the time that you're going to see them, they're quite a dominant reddy brown coloration. And really in your region, you can't mistake it for something else. It's going to be a common darter. And the female looks like this, predominantly greeny yellow. Tops of the eyes are brown with these very distinctive part black stripes along the side and a black under stripe on the bottom of the appendix. Again, there's only one species you can mistake that with, and I'm going to show you the difference between this and that one right now. And one of the ways that you tell a common darter is to check out its legs. So if you look at the legs here, we can see that they are black with a whitey yellow stripe, like a military stripe down the side. Very, very distinctive and easy to spot if it's at a standstill. The reason why that's so important is that the species that you might mistake it with does not have that yellowy white stripe down the side. I mentioned earlier that they lose their colour as they get old. A bit like we go grey, dragonflies lose their coloration. You don't often see it because they've typically died or been eaten by then. But this one, which is a over-mature, that's the politically correct phrase for an old one, over-mature female common darter. This was seen in November of last year, which is very late. You can see it's lost a lot of its coloration. That's when you really need your guidebook. To be honest, they're often dead by then, so you typically won't see it. But I just wanted you to be aware that they do lose their colour as they get older. But I mentioned that you can confuse the common darter with another species, and that's called the ruddy darter. And the difference is they have completely black legs. So if we look on here, you can see on the legs, there is no white or yellowy white stripe on the side. Completely black legs, red body or yellowy green body, but black legs. It's a ruddy darter. There is no other species in your region that you could be mistaking this with. They also have a nipped waist, and I'll show you that in a second. And the male is a vibrant red. The common darter is a reddy brown, a vibrant red with solid black legs. It's a ruddy darter, no other species. See them side by side. On the left is your male ruddy darter. You see the nipped waist compared to this, which is pretty well the same width all the way down. It's a much more vibrant red. It has black legs, whereas this one has the white stripe on the side. So if you see a reddish colored dragonfly in the centre of England, it's either a male common darter, that's the one on the right, or it's a ruddy darter, the one on the left. If it's a vibrant red, black legs, nipped waist, ruddy darter, doesn't have those features, it's a male common darter. Now, I mentioned this 1 in 4 chance of getting your identification right. This is a good example of actually probably 1 in 4, 1 in 5. If you see something that's bluey green flying around, it's going to be one of these species listed on the left-hand side. So what could it be? Well, if it's sort of greenish with some brown, it could be a female common hawker. Despite the name, they're not actually that common, but you'll notice that it has these very distinctive yellow stripes down the side of its thorax, and otherwise it's predominantly brown. And you'll see that the costa, the wing edge, is yellow. So if it has a yellow wing edge, it's yellow and brown, it's a female common hawker. And again, get a photograph, any guidebook, easy to identify from a guidebook once you've identified those main features. The male, if you get to close enough, you will notice that it still has those yellow stripes on the side, still has the yellow costa. It just has more blue in. Again, with a guidebook and a photograph, very easy to identify. If it's more green than brown and blue, it's quite probably a southern hawker. There we have one in the photograph, and they're my favorite dragonfly. The reason they are my favorite dragonfly is that they are very curious, meaning they are curious of you. And one of the ways that you can observe any dragonfly, but particularly the southern hawker, is to watch where they fly up and down. They follow the same route very commonly and stand in the middle of that route. And what it will do is it will fly up to you and observe you for a while before flying round you. They want to know what you are and why you weren't there a minute ago. So they will literally fly right up in front of your face or your body and check you out. And so I spend a lot of time with the southern hawkers, very, very close because of that. That's why I like them so much. They're very easy to identify because they're the only species in the UK that has these yellow headlights on its shoulders. So just get in front of it, let it fly towards you, and if it's got 2 yellow headlights on its shoulders, it's a southern hawker. You can't be mistaking it for something else. There are other species that have a little bit of yellow here, but not like a bold headlight that is very prominent here. So you can't really get this one wrong. If you're in any doubt, just get pictures, as I mentioned, of the rest of its body. All the other hawkers have dots, coloured dots all the way down to the end of their tail, whereas the southern hawker, when you get to S9 and 10, it's a completely coloured band. So that will be the definitive way of identifying it. But to be perfectly honest, I simply let it fly towards me, got those headlights, it's a southern hawker. Now there is another green one that you might come across. While they're flying, I suppose conceivably you could misidentify it, but as you can see, this does not have headlights on its shoulders, and it has a completely green thorax and side of its body. And the only species in the UK that has that is the emperor. It's also the largest one in the UK. So if it's big, bottle green all the way down the side, it's an emperor. You can see this one's been in the wars. They can fly with loads of holes in their wings. This one's clearly got that. You will also see this yellow costa. To be honest, you don't tend to need to spot that because it's bottle green all the way on the side of the body. It's big, it's an emperor. You could conceivably in flight mistake it for a common hawker, but if I flip up and down and you just look at the side of the body, completely green, green and brown, completely green, green and brown. The only real similarity is down towards the end of the abdomen. You see there's quite a bit of brown there. There is on the emperor. But you look at its main body, chalk and cheese. So an emperor, very easy to identify. This does not have headlights on its shoulders, so it can't be a southern hawker. And at this time of year, the only other one it could be is a common hawker. When you get into the autumn, there is another species called the migrant hawker or the autumn hawker. We're not covering that today, but at this time of year, it's got green on it, a bit of brown. It's a common hawker. If it has headlights on its shoulders, it's a southern hawker. And if it's completely green-bodied, it's an emperor. Once you remember that, and don't worry, you don't have to remember all of this, you'll get copies of these slides. It's dead easy to tell the difference between them. So a summary of how you would tell the difference. Firstly, work out, am I looking at a damselfly or a dragonfly? That gives you a 50-50 chance from your guidebook. You're down to about 1 in 20 chance of getting it right. Male or female, that really helps you with the coloration. What color is it? That gives you a 1 in 4 chance of getting the identification right. What body markings does it have? What wing markings does it have? That will be it as far as a guidebook is concerned. You can get it right from there. Something I haven't mentioned, it's less common where I am in the Northeast, more common for you, is sometimes you'll get ones that are also quite hairy. If you spot that, we haven't covered that today, but if you spot that, that's a useful feature to look out for. Take a look at its anal appendage. That'll help you work out whether it's male or female. Look at its behavior. Where was it? All of those features alone or added up will definitely allow you to identify it. But to be honest, you only need 2 or 3 of those to get an identification. And if you take a photograph, you'll easily be able to work out some of those that you see on the screen. In terms of behavior, if you see them doing this, which means they are physically joined together, this is called coupling, then they are mating. The male is on the top, the female is underneath. As mentioned, the male grabs the female by the back of the neck. The female brings up the vulva onto the body of the male, which you can see on the left-hand side there. They are mating at that moment. These ones on the right are not actually mating because she hasn't pulled herself up, but he's probably flying her around to various points, either to mate in different locations, or they've already mated and he's going to take her to a pond and force her into the water, like the one here at the bottom. And they force the female up and down in the water to lay eggs. Or the females will gladly just stay attached, maybe on a leaf, like this one, and lay the eggs. But very commonly, you will see the male literally forcing the female up and down into the water. she will instinctively lay eggs either onto vegetation or in the water when that movement is going on. So if you see them attached together, going up and down on the water, they are laying eggs at that moment, which I've talked about. You're just seeing another image of it there. What happens to that egg is it will hatch and become a nymph or larvae, and it will live anything between a few months and a couple of years under water as a nymph. They're very voracious. They eat other invertebrates, and they will even take on a stickleback. But then on a nice sunny day after April, they will emerge, meaning that they crawl up some vegetation and then they burst out of the body. They burst out of the back of the neck. They unfurl and do a big sit-up, and they grab on to the vegetation with their new legs, and they are now a dragonfly or a damselfly. So they spend part of their life, or the bulk of their life, underwater as a nymph. They crawl up, burst out the back of the neck, and become a dragonfly or damselfly. At that point, they're very vulnerable to predation or falling in the water. That's why I've collected that one on the right. I do not advise you ever to pick them up unless they are clearly drowning. But if you do pick them up, you either put them in the palm of your hand or very, very gently hold them like I'm doing on the right. They are very delicate, particularly at that stage in their life. There you see it, it's bursting out. That's a common data, bursting out of the exoskeleton of the nymph. And they leave that exoskeleton called an exuvia on the vegetation. And if you see one, we really want to have that recorded for reasons that I'm going to come on to. They can't fly off until they have got blood into their wings and they've dried off a bit. So that's me in the background there with a common darter. And if you look at the wings are shiny and they look wet. So if you see a dragonfly with shiny wet wings and it doesn't appear to be flying either at all or very much, it's just emerged, it's just been born. And at that point, if it's going to get predated or trodden on or drown, do just pick it up gently on your hands like that one and just move it into some vegetation, or do as I'm doing here and have a really good close look at it. It's not going to fly off. And by the way, they don't bite you, they eat insects, so they don't bite us and they can't give you anything. I put them onto children's faces when we do guided tours and they freak out. There's no harm whatsoever that they can do to you. And they leave behind these exuvia. That's the exoskeleton. They're very useful for us to know about because it proves that they're breeding in that particular pond or stream. But that's what you're looking out for on vegetation, and that means there is a dragonfly around and it's just left its exoskeleton behind. And those exuvia can be tiny, few millimeters up to 2 centimeters or more. They're very delicate either way. It sometimes is very helpful because it helps us to identify the species of the exuvia. So at the bottom there's an exuvia, but luckily above it, just crawled out of it, is a large red damselfly. So we now know that that exuvia is for a large red damselfly because it's right next to it. If you're going to take photographs, try to always get parallel with the body because of a thing called depth of field. If you take photographs from the front or from the side, the other side of the damselfly or dragonfly will often be out of focus. So this is the best angle to get them at if you want the whole of the creature to be in focus. If you take them from the side, just be aware that some of it is going to be out of focus. But that's fine from an identification point of view. But if you're just wanting a wonderful shot, I would always try and get parallel, like in the first one. If you want to participate in our survey work, either for the Birmingham and Black Country Wildlife Trust or for the British Dragonfly Society, we need to know what you've seen, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But there's something very important to know about dragonfly surveying. And you can tell that from this photograph here. Here we're clearly in India, but those people are not from India. That does not mean that they live there or they bred there or were born there, just because we can see them there. And the same applies to dragonfly. Just because you can see a dragonfly at a particular pond or field does not mean that it lives there, it was born there, and it's breeding there. The way you know that is through either egg laying, but most importantly through exuvia. That means those eggs successfully turned into a nymph, and that nymph successfully turned into a dragonfly or damselfly. So we need to know whether you saw a dragonfly, whether you saw it emerging, whether you saw it laying eggs, or whether you saw an exuvia. And on the British Dragonfly Society recording site that I'm going to show you, you can tell it whether you saw it just flying or whether you saw it doing any of those life cycle stages. And that reason that's important is that proves that it was born and bred right there. If you want to collect the exuvia and take a look at them under a microscope, just remember that they're very tiny and they blow away. I carry with me little pots and slide my fingers up the vegetation just to slide it off, but be prepared that they're like rice paper, they do fly away. I mentioned that you can record them. You're going to be sent this link, but the way to record them is on iRecord. There's a specific iRecord for dragonflies. You'll be sent the direct link, which is this one here. And it's very easy to do. You just put in the date, your name, what it is you think you saw. Be brave, go for it. How certain you are. If you know the sex, put it in. If you don't, you put not recorded. If you took a photo, fantastic, add it to this, and then the equivalent of me in your region will receive instantly a copy of that record, and they will verify whether that's what you did or did not see. You put in the quantity and what it was physically doing. Was it emerging? Was it laying eggs? Or was it just flying? That's on the right-hand side. Takes a few seconds to do this. You can do this from your phone, or you can do this when you get home from your PC. And these records really help because then they tell other people where to go to see them. But it also, over time, allows us to tell if a certain habitat is declining as far as dragonflies are concerned, and whether we should intervene in some way to try and do something to help that habitat. So the more records, the better, please. So I've done all the talking, so I'm now going to allow you to unmute because it's test time. What is that one? Be brave, unmute, give it a go. I can wait all evening. I have nothing else to do. What are we looking at?
Anne's just said it's a common darter on the chat.
Well done. That is indeed a male common darter. How do we know that? It's reddy brown. And in your region, a reddy brown dragonfly is indeed a common darter. Remember, females tend to be less colourful. It's going to be yellowy green, but where there's a female, there's always a male. So if you can't work out what the female is, just look for the male and use some logic from there. Well done. Now, this one was not in the ID guide, but remember that the people who give the names to dragonflies are really not that creative. They tend to be very descriptive, always of the male, by the way. The description is always of the male. So just using some logic, what's the most distinctive feature of this one? And therefore, what do you think you're looking at? What do you think it might be called? What does it have a lot of? Well, this is a bit tricky. Somebody the other night when I asked this question said, is it called a tiger dragonfly? And that would be a great name for it. But it's called a golden ringed dragonfly. And again, if you see one and you think, I really don't know what that's called, do remember that for the males, often the names correspond to what it looks like. Not always, of course, you know, the emperor, for instance, but it's very common that they are just called as per their distinctive feature. So this is a golden ring. You don't really get very many in your region. The reason I'm showing you it is, particularly if you travel around the UK, you do see these and they're incredibly distinctive and people get quite excited because it's so different to anything they've seen. If you see one like this, it's a golden ringed dragonfly. What is that? No one's unmuting, no one's typing. Let me give you some clues. What colour?
Is it red damselfly?
It is a large red damselfly. How do we know that? Because it's a damselfly and it's red. And in your region, the only one that is red and a damselfly is the large red. Therefore, you cannot get that one wrong. Well done, whoever said that. It's a large red damselfly. What's this one?
Ruddy darter.
Well done. That is a ruddy darter. How do we know that? Because it's a dragonfly and it's a vibrant red and it has solid black legs. Therefore, there's no other one in the centre of England that this could possibly be. So you can hopefully get a feel that actually once you've got a few tips to what to look for, particularly if you take a photograph and get a guidebook, it's very easy to identify dragonflies. As I mentioned, in 4 years, I've gone from knowing nothing to being the county recorder. So you can learn these very, very quickly. Always be on the lookout. This is me in Mexico, as I mentioned earlier. This poor one thinks the swimming pool might be a good place to lay some eggs. It was going to get a bit of a shock. So they're around if you just keep your eyes open. So many of the sites that we're encouraging you to go to are linked to the Birmingham Black Country Wildlife Trust. If you're not a member, please do remember that the only way really that we can keep these sites maintained is to either use membership fees and donations or grants that we get. And those grants are often done in proportion to how much money do we bring in through membership and donations? So very commonly, the way we think of it is that for every £1 that is either donated or through membership, we can often turn that into £3 or £4, both through tax relief and through getting grants that are based on how much money do we get in membership. So please, if you want to help these sites to be maintained and encouraged for dragonflies, if you're not a member, please do. Or you can volunteer and help out on the sites. So you'll see in the slides that you get, there'll be the links to how to join and how to volunteer. I started as a volunteer. It's a great way of getting out there, talking to other people who are interested in this sort of thing, learning what it is you're looking at, very rewarding. You can do it as much or as little as you want. That's the benefit of volunteering. If you've never done it before, I would urge you to do so.